Good morning. My name is Stephen, for those of you who do not know me. We're continuing our series in 1 Thessalonians, and we've arrived here, chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. And we're going to see that these verses are very closely tied to what was preached last week in verses 1 through 8. And I want us to think of it this way. When we think about things that matter, even think about that word, matter. It comes from the kind of the old ancient understanding of what is important, what is significant, what matters. Even though it's referring to mass in a kind of a physical sense, but that which has heaviness, weightiness to it are those things that matter. And our world tells us that significance comes through visibility. To matter is to be noticed. To be important, you need to have some level of influence. To have value, you need to have followers, achievements, recognition. What sort of an impact? What kind of platform? How can I maximize my potential, curate my image online to stay relevant? These are the ways that we think about whether we matter or whether we have significance, by visibility. That is why we pursue social media validation. We have the fear of exclusion, cancellation anxiety. We crave deep inside visibility because our worth, as the world tells us, is measured by our visibility. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Weight of Glory, says this. He says, "We do not merely want to see beauty, we want something else which can hardly be put into words, to be united with the beauty that we see, to pass into it, to receive it into ourselves." You see what he's saying there? He's saying it's not just that we might be able to see beauty, but we want the beauty to see us. We want to be seen by the beauty because we desperately long for affirmation. We often seek those things through popularity and perhaps even romance, but Paul is going to show us, he will continue to show us over and over again, where our significance lies. That our ultimate validation is not in crowds, it's not in prestige, it's not in some level of social standing, but it lies somewhere else. My friend Michael Horton, who's a theologian from California, he wrote a book, I think it's Ordinary or Ordinary Life, something like that. The book is definitely not ordinary, but he says that in our culture, we tend to use words like radical, epic, revolutionary, ultimate, extreme, great. Think about how many times you use the word great. We use it so casually that it's hard for us to refer to those things that are really great because somebody asks, how you doing? Oh, great. Or awesome or innovative, the next big thing. And many of us remember the first instructors who taught us grammar probably when you were in middle school, taking a foreign language, unfortunately. We should have learned it in first or second grade. And they've taught us that if you make every sentence an exclamation or put every word in bold, then nothing stands out. Could you imagine sending somebody a text, everything in bold? First of all, they're going to get freaked out because a little too intense, right? It's like, right? And we usually think that's a scam or something if somebody's sending us something like that. But we are caught up with superlatives. That is our problem. We get attracted to superlatives. We don't recognize the beauty, and hear this, we don't recognize the beauty of an unnoticed life. I didn't say a lonely life, an unnoticed life. It says in Genesis 5:24, Enoch walked with God. That's all it tells us about Enoch, although there's been Enochic traditions and extra Jewish temple literature call for a second, third Enoch. But in Scripture itself, There isn't much said about Enoch. It says Enoch walked with God. Could you imagine that being your statement on your gravestone in your burial? That this person walked with God. That would be pretty amazing if that were your epitaph. It does not say that Enoch cartwheeled with God. It does not say that Enoch somersaulted with God. It simply says that he walked with God. It is an ordinary, non-dramatic, uneventful, daily, rhythmic movement of walking. You don't think about breathing, do you? I hope you don't. I mean, you're not sitting there thinking, am I breathing? It just happens naturally. It's organic. It's very common. It is ordinary. It's the same thing with walking. You don't think about walking. You don't think about whether or not your arms, it just happens. And the Bible gives us an astonishingly different vision of what it means to matter and have significance in life. And it's actually rather unimpressive. That is ordinary. It's not about visibility, being out there. So here's the question I want to pose to our text. How do we cultivate an outer life that pleases God in a restless world? And now, where am I getting that pleasing God? Because this passage here, verses 9 through 12, these verses are tied to what went earlier in verses 1 through 8. So I want us to look at this here in a moment. But the question is, how do we cultivate an outer life that pleases God in a restless world? There are three ways to do it. First of all, is to love without calculation. Secondly, is to work without applause. And third is to serve without expectation. Or to put it another way, to love unconditionally, to work quietly, and to serve sacrificially. Let's look at the first one. To love without calculation. That is, no qualification, no limits, just self-giving. Let's look here in verses 9 through 10. Now, concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. For that indeed is what you are doing to all the brothers throughout Macedonia. But we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more. Now, this is tied in with what was stated earlier in verses 1 and following. Look here in verse 1. Finally, then, brothers, we ask and urge you in the Lord Jesus, and here's the introduction of a purpose clause, that in order that as you receive from us how you ought to walk and to please God just as you are doing, that you do this more and more. Here's the same phrase again. What are we supposed to do more and more of? That is to walk and to live and to please God. And then he goes on to say that there are two ways to do this. One is to focus on the inner life, which was preached last week. That is, here is the will of God, your sanctification, to abstain from sexual immorality. So that is to focus on the inner life. And now he's here in verses 9 through 12 saying this is what it means for you to live and to walk and to please God. This is the will of God for you to focus on the outer life. And what is the outer life? It involves interacting with other people in social community, with our culture, with our city, and also, of course, with our neighbors, and with our family members, and with those who are here at church. That is why we use language like, we're not like a family. Jonathan's going to love this because I'm stating what he says all the time, but we are a family. So this is the outer life. And Paul is very, very concerned not only with the inner life. Of course, there is a priority of the inner life, but there's also a necessity and essential fruit in response to that inner life doing its work, which affects our outer life. Not in the reverse, but it's still there and necessary. Barbara Fredrickson, a faculty member at UNC in the psychology department, has written a book probably about 10 or 15 years ago entitled Love 2.0. Like love needs an upgrade, but here it is, the new and improved version of love. This is what she says, and I quote, Love is not exclusive. Love's timetable is far shorter than we typically think. Love, as you'll see, is not lasting. And perhaps most challenging of all, love is not unconditional. Love is the micro moment of warmth and connection that you share with another living being. Love is an emotion, a momentary state. Right now, at this very moment in which I am crafting this sentence, I do not love my husband. Our positivity resonance, after all, only lasts as long as we two are engaged with one another. The same goes for you and your other loved ones. Unless you're cuddled up with someone reading these words aloud to him or her right now, you don't love anyone. Now, I'm trying really hard not to roll my eyes here. You know, whether you're a Christian or not, you know that this does not reflect reality. You know, I've been boasting and sharing this a lot, and you're probably sick of my hearing about my grandsons, but no one has to tell me. I don't have to put a positivity resonance barometer out there for me to recognize whether I'm having a micro moment of affectional love for my grandchildren. When I see my children, when I see my grandsons, my heart naturally gravitates towards them. It's not momentary. It is actually intrinsic. It's natural. It's organic. There's something inside of me that just kind of gets drawn out of me. I wonder if Barbara Fredrickson, if she has the same approach to her own children, the same principle. This would at best be a pathetically irresponsible, unloving parent, and we have laws against parental neglect. What Apostle Paul is saying here is that what it means to be human is to love. To love one another. And to love without calculation, without reservation, and without limit. It is unconditional. Could you imagine going up and sharing your vows and to say that, you know what, I'm going to, honey, I hope we can make it beyond 3 years because we love each other conditionally, but it all depends on your performance. What sort of security does that provide? Even if you might not believe that deep in your heart, at least you want to pretend that that won't be the case. Even if you don't believe that, wouldn't you want it to be true? That love is unconditional? That we don't need an upgraded version 2.0? That's why Paul here in verse 9 says, now concerning brotherly love, this is the word where we get the name of the city, Philadelphia. It's a combination of two Greek words, phileo, love, and adelphos, which is brother. It's a love of brother or an affection for a brother. And almost invariably in all of Hellenistic culture, it denoted affection for the brother by birth, by kin, by kinship. And Apostle Paul has the audacity to now apply it to other people who are not genetically connected to one another. You know what that's called? It's called the church. We are not like a family. We are a family. That's what Paul is trying to say. So what we have in the work of Jesus Christ is that he has loved us even at our worst. Because the reason why we are able to love other people, because what he said earlier on in chapter 1, what did he say? You are loved by God. You are chosen by God. It says in chapter 3, you were called by God. And he uses the kind of the parental, fatherly, and maternal kind of image of saying that essentially you are cared for and shepherded by others and ultimately by God. You cannot give what you do not possess, my friends. You cannot give what you do not possess. The reason why Apostle Paul is saying that we can love other people and we ought to love other people unconditionally without calculation is because we have been loved by God. People who know they are fully accepted in Christ can become liberated from self-promotion. That they can think about other people's needs before their own. That we have the ability and the capacity to forgive, to serve, to give, and to sacrifice. Listen to what Don Carson says. What binds us together, that would be brothers and sisters in Christ, what binds us together is not a common nationality, a common education, not a common race, a common income levels, common politics, common accents, common jobs, or anything else of that sort. Christians come together because they all have been loved by Jesus himself. They are a band of natural enemies who love one another for his sake. I love that. The phrase more and more here is an idiom that means increasingly to a greater extent over time with growing frequency and intensity. It is describing quantity, intensity, and frequency. It is talking about a gradual increase, but he's already commended them. It's not as though they weren't loving one another. He says you need to abound in this more and more. It's the heart of a father. Hey, I see the fruit in your life of how you're able to love other people, which is the evidence of your outer life, which is flowing out from the inner life of what Christ has accomplished for you. You have been loved, you have been chosen, therefore you know how to love. I see that in you. That's a beautiful thing. Do more of that. More and more. There is a philosopher that I admire. His name is Luc Ferry. He is a French philosopher who teaches out of Sorbonne in Paris, and he's written a book entitled The Brief History of Thought. Now, he's not a Christian. He's a philosopher. But he's an honest philosopher, thankfully. And he has a chapter in there where he talks about how Christianity has defeated Greek philosophy. So he is somebody who is looking at how history has progressed and how the ideas and the thoughts have shaped our world and shaped our culture. So he's doing this from a philosophical point of view. I mean, there's another book written by Rodney Stark who wrote a book, The Rise of Christianity. He does that from a sociological perspective. And then, of course, you're familiar with Holland's book on Dominion, who does it from a historical point of view. So he goes on to say this. He says, Logos, a Greek term, was understood by the Greeks to be an impersonal, harmonious divine structure or a divine principle. So this is what the Greeks believed. They philosophized about the Logos. That's where we get the English word logic or logical, right? It's the logical ordering of the world or the cosmos as we know it. The divine harmonious structure, the divine principle of all of this. And Christianity has the audacity to now personalize that? Yes. John 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And now the word there, and word in the Greek is logos. And he goes on to say that Christianity was to have an incalculable effect upon the history of ideas. In this Christian reevaluation of the human person, of the individual as such, the philosophy, here it is, of the human rights to which we subscribe today would never be established had it not been for Christianity. Now, granted, our culture wants to co-opt and plagiarize and borrow from that which evolved from Christianity, but nevertheless, this did not come from Hellenistic culture. It did not come from Greek thought, but it was a natural outflowing in terms of our thinking from Christianity. Because the Logos, the logical structure of the entire cosmos, was personalized in the person of Jesus Christ. It was an unfathomable shift. This was what was epic. This was disruptive. And he goes on to say, the Greek world was fundamentally an Aristotic world, a universe organized as a hierarchy in which most endowed by nature should be, in principle, be at the top, while the less endowed saw themselves occupying inferior ranks. And Christianity came onto the scene and contradicted that assumption. It taught the people the principle and the biblical idea of the imago Dei, that every individual, every human being was created from the image of God. In other words, it's not as though those who were only focusing on contemplation, those who were in these kind of higher classes, they're the ones who are elevated and they're the ones who are important, and everyone else down here, the servants, in the lower class. This was an ideological caste system. They did not see the equality and dignity in all human beings, but Christianity came onto the scene and provided this unprecedented, disruptive reality. It was not acquired, but it was inherited. That is why Apostle Paul says to love one another, because the entire concept of love was very, very foreign to a Greek world. What do you mean to love? We're supposed to utilize. We're supposed to steward and to use other people depending on our system of patronage. We're not all equal. We clearly know we're not equal. Cicero, Aristotle, all these Greek philosophers that we admire, they didn't think that everyone was equal and they had equal common humanity and dignity. They did not believe that. They knew that certain people needed to be of a certain class, a higher class, and there needed to be others who would serve that higher class. And Christianity said, no. That's not what God believes. This is not what God has told us. This is the reason why we can look at any individual, regardless of their background, regardless of their educational level, regardless of where they've come from. But you know what? You might all say and sit there and be like, yeah, of course, this is a great principle. We believe this. But in the city of Boston, do you know what? It believes more in Greek philosophy than it does the principles of Christianity. You will not be in a city more concerned about the level of excellence and performance than the city of Boston. See, everything is ranked. Where are you? What kind of work do you do? Where did you get your educational training? Oh, by the way, do you have any terminal degrees? What is your income level? I mean, everything is measured based upon visibility. Everything is measured based upon your own performance. And you know what, my friends? And you know this to be true through your own existential experience, through your own angst. That is exhausting. That's an exhausting life. Because even if you think you are elevating, even though you're developing, you know that you have never quite completely arrived. So how do we cultivate an outer life that pleases God in a restless world? That we don't believe what the culture says, but we believe what the Bible says, and that is to love one another without calculation. Number 2, to work without applause. Look here in verse 11. And to aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs and to work with your hands as we instructed you. Now, this might sound like, especially for those of you in your 20s, like, oh, it kind of sounds like my parent. like sounds a little condescending, Paul. Yeah, you're just kind of like, hey, okay, work diligently with your hands and mind your own business, to aspire to live quietly. No, it's not that tone at all. Remember, he loves these people. Remember, like a father and like a mother. He loves the people here in this congregation in the city of Thessalonica. What he's trying to tell them is, this is what it means to have a fruitful, abundant, cruciform version of the outer life that is flowing out from your understanding of what it means to live, walk, and to please God. To work without applause. Now, the word idle, A-D-L-E, not A-D-O-L, A-D-L-E, idle, is not used in this particular passage, but it is used 4 other times in the Thessalonian letters, 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians. And what he's describing here is exactly the same group of people. The first time we see it is in chapter 5, verse 14. And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle. And then in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 11, for we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Do you see that language? Now, you're not going to be able to see this. You see a little bit of it in the English, but in the Greek, he's doing a word play. He says that many of you are walking in idleness. The word there for walk in Greek begins with the word peri, where we get words like peripatetic, not pathetic, but pathetic, I think, and where you get the words like perichoresis, right? or the most familiar one will be perimeter, right? Perimeter. And that just simply means around. So for us to walk, we're supposed to walk around the object of what we're supposed to be focused on, our responsibility, whatever it is. But here, rather than walking to please God, remember the same verb that was used 2 times, once in verse 1, and then also later on in our passage here in chapter 4. These people were walking around in their idleness. They weren't actually focused on their work. They're just kind of tiptoeing around that which they were supposed to do, which means, here's an application. Many of you can be very busy, but that doesn't mean that you're being productive. It's called procrastination, right? You can be very, very industrious. You can be spending a lot of time, a lot of energy on these things, and you're a busybody. And you see the word here, busybody, is not being busy with work, but it's a word play on the work because it's included in this word here, busybody, and it takes a part of the verb to walk, which takes the word peri. Right? So what it's doing is that they are busybodies. In other words, they're walking around the work. Have you done this? Like you have a responsibility right here, the deadline, it's due in like 6 hours, but you're not actually focused on that, but you are walking around it, and you're probably doing this, focused on other things, and you're trying to multitask, and you're trying to avoid it because you're afraid, because you're under the deadline and the pressure. That's what it means to be a busybody. You're not actually being fruitful. And so Paul is challenging that. The Bible actually describes this as a form of undisciplined, disruptive, kind of disorderly, sometimes lazy. That's the term that's used oftentimes in the book of Proverbs. You're saying, well, how can I be lazy if I'm being very busy? Well, that's the point. You're not involved in the busyness or the business of your work, but you're being a busybody. You're walking around the work. I love the way that Paul, if you could see it as I'm trying to describe it, it would be pretty amazing. Let me say what he is not saying. He is not saying that the idle are those who are unable. That's not what he's saying. He's talking about those who are unwilling. Okay, there's a big difference. In other words, that as one commentator says, that Paul is not condemning here unemployment. That's not what because some of you want to work, you have the willingness to work, but for whatever reason, the circumstances, you're not able to work. That's not what he's saying. He's not talking to those people who are saying, I'm so eager to work, I want to serve, and I want to be faithful with my the gifts and the resources that I've received from God, but I just can't find work. No, he's not rebuking those. He's talking about those who are able to work, but who don't want to work. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics or the sociology behind all of this. I'm just telling you what Paul is saying. I believe that if you're able to work, you should work. If you have the willingness, if you have the ability, then you should have the willingness to do so. The Bible speaks against complacency. It speaks against apathy. It speaks against not wanting to do something that we've been called to do, that we're supposed to work without applause and without wanting to get recognition. That's what Paul is saying. You need to live a quiet life. Mind your own affairs. And a good word for this here, the people who are engaged in this kind of activity, some people have said, hey, give them a break. They thought that Christ was returning in their lifetime. And so if we thought that Jesus were returning, which of course the Bible makes clear, we don't know when, but if they thought that Jesus were returning in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they're saying, hey, what's the point in going to work, waking up in the morning and meeting the deadline? What's the point, you see? So some people have tried to excuse him that way because there are issues about the future coming, the return of Christ, and it talks about the parousia, the second advent of Christ and all of that. We'll see next week that it deals with this. I'm not saying that's completely out of the question, but what's going on here is that these people are meddlers. Have you ever repented of your meddling? Don't be a meddler. That's what Paul is saying. Don't be a meddler. In other words, don't be so preoccupied with other people's business, about other people's successes, other people's decisions. And you're saying, oh, yeah, I'm with you on that. Well, are you really? What do you do on social media? You're looking at other people's lives. You're looking at other people's stories. You're looking at other people's successes and probably having a stomachache as a result of that, and you're probably delighting perhaps in their successes, called schadenfreude. You look at this, and social media monetizes insecurity, because every time you look at it, you're saying, oh, why aren't people looking at my life? Why aren't they meddling with my life? And you sense as though maybe I'm a little behind. And that feeds insecurity. You see how this works? Much of the Christian life, my friends, is hidden. No one sees your prayer life, your repentance, your unseen acts of service, the ordinary work that you do. The deepest work that you can be doing in service to God might not receive any applause at all. And look at the person of Jesus himself. For most of his life, for 30 plus years of his life, he lived in obscurity. He came from a town that you wouldn't even recognize. If I were to mention some kind of rural town here in Massachusetts that doesn't begin with a W, because there are a lot of towns that begin with the letter W. If I were to reference, you say, I didn't know that was in Massachusetts. He lived in obscurity. He came from a little town up in Galilee. Not even Jerusalem, not even in the southern part in Judea, but Nazareth. He lived largely hidden in obscurity. Do you know why? Because faithfulness matters more than visibility, my friends. Faithfulness matters more than visibility. You know, even when we talk to one another, when we think about work, I don't have time to kind of summarize all the great things that we were able to do through our Center for Faith and Work out of the Hub Institute. And we had a cohort and that we went through. By the way, we will have a conference in the fall, and we're going to have, I believe, Pastor Jonathan is going to lead another cohort or lab or something coming in the fall. And we talk a lot about work. And you know, we tend to think work is, you know, that what we do for a living, right? We tend to think, well, work is making a living. Is that your understanding of what work is? Listen to Dorothy Sayers, who's a wonderful British author who was a friend and contemporary of C.S. Lewis, and this is what she writes about work. She said, work is not primarily a thing one does to live, but the thing one lives to do. Here, let me say that again. Work is not primarily a thing one does to live, but the thing one lives to do. It is, or it should be, the full expression of the worker's faculties, the thing in which he finds or she finds herself spiritual, mental, and bodily satisfaction, in the medium in which she offers herself to God. That, in other words, that she had this biblical doctrine of work, which was, I'm going to use my work in order to serve other people for the good of the common good, for human flourishing wherever God has placed me. And this is referring to all types of work, not just compensated work. You think raising a child is not real work? That's great work. It's not compensated. Maybe you might get a return later on in retirement, but so what she's saying is that work has intrinsic dignity. It is beautiful by virtue of following and imaging and being modeled by that which God himself did himself. God is the creator of all things. He is the one who works, and then he rested. He's the one who introduced to us this beautiful rhythm of work-rest cycle. So what Paul is saying here is that when he goes on, when he pivots in verse 11 through 12, about work, what he's saying here about work is not unrelated to what he said earlier on about loving. Commentators have pointed out that the working is the way you love your neighbor. Have you thought of your work that way? Have you thought about your work as a way to love your neighbor? Absolutely. Well, you can if you're living and working quietly. If you're minding your own affairs and your own business, you're not meddling with other people's business. So here's a simple application. That would mean that if you are a member, you should not think that you're responsible as a member if you're involved in some form of ministry, that you want to meddle with somebody else in someone else's ministry. They're responsible for what they need to do on their team. A deacon is not supposed to meddle with the affairs of the elder or the pastor because they have different responsibilities. We work together as a team. Could you imagine if the third baseman on a baseball field is always trying to go a little more to his left in order to take more of the territory of the shortstop? No, just stay in your lane, stay in your space, because somebody might hit a ball right down the line and you're going to miss it. The reason why I'm a shortstop and you're a third baseman is because I have greater range. But you think that you're the shortstop. So you're shirking your responsibility by not protecting the whatever, down the line, protecting the, whatever the expression is here. And you're trying to meddle with someone else's responsibility. So if you're a member and you're trying to say, well, the pastor should be doing it this way, let me give this person, he should be doing it. Don't meddle with that person's business or that person's affair, that person's responsibility. We all have to stay in our own lane and to work in harmony. Could you imagine if the child is trying to meddle with the responsibility of the parent? Although I'm sure that happens. So what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to be an investor in the Christian community, not a parasite of the Christian community. Did that sting a little bit? Well, it was meant to. Paul is saying, don't be parasitic. Don't suck the life out of the community. Focus on your responsibility and be an investor. Pour into the community. Give what you can offer. And don't expect anything in return. Don't do it in order to receive applause or recognition. It is your privilege to serve the community. And let me just say one other thing here. When he says here that we should aspire to live quietly, to strive for quietness, he's saying that we should strive. It seems a little bit oxymoronic, doesn't it? It says, be ambitious for not being ambitious. That's essentially what he's saying. Be ambitious to not be ambitious. He's saying aspire to live a quiet life. Have that as a goal in your life. Because he understands, like especially for a metropolitan, cosmopolitan, global city such as ours, that the temptation is for us to be restless when we are the most busy. We're extremely restless. There's a disquietness within our hearts. Even though you might be getting rest, going on holiday for a week, you're not truly resting. Why? Because it's not real, spiritual, deep REM rest. Some of you might get 8-9 hours of sleep at night, but I can get 5 hours of REM sleep and I will be better rested than you. Because the experts, the sleep experts will tell you that rapid eye movement, REM sleep is that's when you have your dreams, right? And that's when you are able to go into a deep level of sleep where there's deep rest. And that's what the Bible is trying to say. What Paul is trying to say is that your deep spiritual REM rest for your soul is for you to live a quiet life, a restful life, not a distracted life. So if you work for a living, that means the work itself becomes the means. You're using work in order to get something else, usually like success, money, or status, or acclaim. It's for something else. And he is saying that we ought to focus on the work and to recognize the gift of the work. So here are two potential dangers. One is for you to overwork, and the other one is to underwork. That's why he says, again here in verse 11, to aspire to live quietly. That means don't overwork. Some of you overwork. You're workaholics, right? You're always under pressure, and you overwork. That means you're trying to find your identity and your dignity in the work that you do. You're trying to acquire money or you have goals for success or build a status, something. Or on the other hand, you will underwork, which means that you say, I'm just doing it for the paycheck. I really don't like this, and work kind of sucks. And so either you will make work an idol, A-D-O-L, if you overwork, or you will be idle in your work, I-D-L-E, if you underwork. You'll either be a workaholic or you'll be a slacker. You'll either despise work or you will worship your work. And Paul is trying to give you a balance. He's saying that the way that you're going to be able to find rest and actually even use work as a means and a gift to bless other people and to love them well is for you to mind your own affairs, to stay in your own lane, to utilize the gifts that God has given you and to serve. Because all the work that you do, all of the work, whatever, even if no one recognizes it, even if you receive no recognition or applause, that this work can be used as a tool or a gift for the common good. You know, if I were to drive down to New York City and to spend some time with my grandsons, could you imagine if the people who have to maintain the highways, and we pay taxes for that, thankfully, but if the roads going down Mass Pike and whatever, Route 15 or even 95 or 91, whatever those interstates are, could you imagine if they were like the streets in Somerville? I'm sorry, but can somebody please take care of the roads in Somerville? This is a pothole like every 3-4 feet, right? It's like, so you got to, you're driving like this, and it will take me weeks. You see, someone had to do that work. Now, no one is going to praise you for all well done for taking care of the roads on Mass Pike, but that was good work. It was common work. And because we have an Aristotelian Greek understanding of work, where we only focus on contemplation and look down upon the things that focus on manual labor, we kind of look down upon the people who do manual labor to use their hands. And Apostle Paul is saying, work with your hands. He understands all of the idols within the Greek culture. He understands, oh yeah, I know, you think that contemplation, all of you, you're thinking that this is better, you're part of the higher class. Well, guess what? The Bible equalizes everyone. We're all sinners in need of God's grace. And by the way, the Bible gives a picture of God where he worked with his hands. I know he's spirit, but the whole anthropomorphic kind of picture of how God used his hands to create creation. And Jesus Christ himself was a carpenter. Work has intrinsic dignity, my friends. And work, as one commentator put it, we're not being redeemed out of the world or taken out of the world. We're being redeemed and renewed for this world. This is the reason why the reformers rightly had concerns about some of the writings and the principles of the Desert Fathers during the patristic period and a lot of the mystics, because they would talk about a monastic lifestyle or being ascetic and removing yourself from the world, and they're saying that's not biblical. Don't be drawn to those principles. We have been called to be the salt of the earth and light of the world. Because Jesus is the light of the world, and therefore he's put the light in us, and we can be the light of the world. That doesn't mean that we accommodate and then we over-assimilate and we compromise the principles that we understand the gospel to represent. But it doesn't mean that we live a completely secluded, protected life. It means that we need to be out there in the world. And thirdly and lastly and quickly, how do we cultivate an outer life that pleases God in a restless world? Verse 12, to serve without expectation, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. Now, this sounds a little strange too, but essentially what he's saying here is that the way that you walk and to present your life will be a great testimony to those who are watching you. You know, Jerome, one of the great patristic authors, he says something like, these Christians know how to love one another. That was his description. And the reason why, again, we know this is because you cannot give what you do not possess. Jesus loved perfectly, he lived and worked quietly, and he served faithfully. And he's the one who labored for us. He did not shirk his responsibility. He knew what his responsibility was as the second person of the Godhead, and he fulfilled that which he was called to do through the incarnation. Our world says significance comes from visibility, but the gospel says it comes from faithfulness. Let your understanding of this Recognize that your life is found in your significance and it matters because you understand this. You know, the world will say something like, make noise so people will notice you. Are you familiar with the squeaky wheel gets the grease? Are you familiar with this proverb? Just means that if there's a squeaky wheel, it's going to get the attention, right? I mean, it's usually the squeaky child who gets the attention of the parents, and the other quiet one gets neglected, and then they have to receive therapy 20 years later. But the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But you know, there's another culture, an Eastern culture, that says this: the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. So who's right? It's the complete opposite. Right? And so for me, half of me Western culture, half of me Eastern culture, that's when you start having existential, problems. Which is it? But thankfully, I understand the gospel, and the gospel says neither. The gospel does not hammer us down and say, who are you trying to be? Stay in your place. It's not punitive. But on the other hand, don't try to make yourself so visible and try to draw attention. Live a quiet life. There's something beautiful about an unnoticed life, about an unhurried life. This is what Jesus says in Matthew 11, 28 through 30. He says, come to me, all you who are, what? Weary and heavy laden or burdened, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest. He says, I've done the finished work to rest. Here's a deep rest that you cannot receive from anywhere else. And as Dane Ortlund said, many of you know Gavin Ortlund, this is his older brother. In his book, Gentle and Lowly, he wrote that when Jesus says that I am gentle, he is saying that he is meek, humble, and gentle. That Jesus is not, here it is, trigger happy. He's not harsh. He's not reactionary. He's not easily exasperated. He is the most accessible and the most approachable, even though he is full of holiness and resplendent glory. He is the most accessible. There are no prerequisites. All you have to do is give yourself up to him. And it does not say, well, you have to be unburdened from your restlessness. He says, come if you recognize it, and then you come to me, because I will be able to give rest for those who labor and are heavy laden. So if that's where you are, no payment is necessary. You have to get rid of this idea. As Thomas Goodwin, the great 17th century Puritan, said, this is what he said: men are apt to have contrary conceits of Christ, but he tells them his disposition here in this passage, where he says, by preventing such hard thoughts of him to allure them into the more, we are apt to think that he, being so holy, is therefore of severe, sour disposition. Jesus is not of a severe and sour disposition. The Bible tells us a lot about the work of Christ, about the life of Christ. There's only one verse that tells us about the heart of Christ. That's in Matthew 11:28. And he says, come to me, and I will give you rest. For I am gentle and lowly in heart. This is the place where he said, if you were to cut me, this is what I believe. Yes, I am glorious. Yes, I am holy. But get this skewed instinct out of your mind, the kind of the natural, apt instinct that you might have. Well, someone is going to be this glorious, and then he's going to reject me. He says that if you are heavy laden, if you are burdened, if you are weary, then I invite you. So here's some application. If you are a meddler and you're recognizing this, and the Lord has helped you to see that you're a meddler, not the person in front of you. If you are a meddler and you're a controller, here's the application. You can entrust others to the Lord and focus on your own obedience, not on someone else's obedience. Wives, not on your husband's obedience. Husbands, not on your wife's obedience. Focus on your obedience. If you're lonely and you are struggling with wanting to be loved, here's the application. Because Christ satisfies your deepest need for love, you can stop demanding others to complete you. You are complete because of your union with Christ. Not because God's going to provide you a husband, or God's going to provide you a wife. Perhaps that might be the call that God has placed upon your life. Not because you've been praying for children and you have not yet received children, that you think that that's going to complete the family. You already are a family. For those of you who are exhausted, workaholic, professional workers and laborers, here's the application. No labor done unto Christ is wasted. No labor done unto Christ is wasted. If you're anxious, what if you no longer need to prove your worth and significance because it's found outside of you? So now, if this is the case, and if this is what Christ has accomplished for us, then now we can move out into the world and we can affirm other people, that is to affirm their strengths and abilities and gifts, that you can be an encourager, not to sap the life out of people. You can share your space, your goods, and your time. Think about ways that you can do that this week. Or that you can serve other people through bearing other people's problems and forgiveness, and to serve one another's interests before your own. That the way that Paul reframes the entire Christian community around kinship rather than patronage hierarchy. Patronage hierarchy said, here's a patron, gets into a relationship with a client, a friend. That's why he uses the word brothers more than he uses the word friends. And the one who had more wealth and more means would be able to provide favors and to be able to provide resources for the person who was a client or friend. And therefore, it was easy for the person to just depend upon the patron. And perhaps this is what's going on here. That's why he says, be dependent on no one. You see? Because a Christian recognizes personal responsibility and agency. Don't just blame everyone for your problems. Don't put all the burden on other people. Be somebody who's going to invest in the Christian community, just as Paul reframes the entire social order of the Christian church away from the honor dependency system that he finds in the Greek world. This will be my last thought. I just heard my favorite public intellectual give a commencement speech at NYU at Yankee Stadium. I didn't like the fact that he was speaking at the Yankee Stadium, but he is from New York. His name is Jonathan Haidt, who teaches at NYU. And he was quoting Mary Oliver, a poet, who said this. Here's her short poem. Pay attention, be astonished, tell others about it. I was like, wow, that was a short poem. I love it. And so based upon that, his entire point, and there were many people who walked out, and they're the ones who probably needed to hear the speech, but this was his main point in the commencement speech. He said, treasure your attention. Treasure your attention. Because he says, you know what? In this world, people are not asking for your attention. You know that, right? People are not asking for your attention. They are capturing your attention. In other words, they're seizing it in a hostile manner and you don't even realize it. They're not saying whether or not you deserve the attention or whether or not you can earn the attention. Do you know how much Meta is worth? Over $1 trillion. Has any one of us ever given to Meta? Has anyone given anything to Meta? They were able to figure out a business model, monetize it, and to capture and to steal your attention and sell it to advertisers, and they're worth $1 trillion. $1 trillion. I'm pretty clever. For Meta, your attention is $1 trillion. And Haidt went on to say, but for you, it should be priceless. So don't let somebody take it from you. Oh, again, he's not a Christian, as brilliant as he is, he's not a Christian. But I would say it this way, if I can reframe, if I may, reframe what he was saying. We should guard our attention so that we can treasure the object of our attention. We should guard our attention. Everyone is fighting for your attention. And I want you to know that when you go to the Grand Canyon does not beg for your attention. The Grand Canyon is not saying, please recognize how beautiful I am. Right? It seems a little absurd, doesn't it? And he went on to say, you should spend a lot of your attention on real people in the real world. And I would add by saying, and there's no one more real than God. You see, in a world that has developed and advanced and ascended so quickly, and I'm not trying to make a call here to be anti-AI or anything like that, But there's a strange kind of loneliness. Do you know that this generation in their 20s, they're more lonely than people in my generation? I don't have social media, and I don't have followers. No one knows. I don't really have a footprint. I have no footprint. No one knows what I'm doing. Barely, some few of you might listen to what I'm saying today. But I'm less lonely than you. How is that possible? Because, listen to what, and I really will end with this. Freya, India, in my opinion, probably the most esteemed and the greatest Gen Z writer, who's British. She wrote in her best-selling book, Girls, which just came out a month ago. It's already a bestseller. This is what she says. Especially for those of you in your 20s, ladies, read it. It's very, very insightful, honest assessment of what's going on. And she writes, many young women don't have friends anymore. We have followers. We don't care about each other's lives. We consume other people's content. We don't have people we can be vulnerable with. We have people who view our stories. It's hard to tell if friends are loyal or hoping we like their posts back. Meeting someone new now means swapping socials and scrolling through and skipping past each other's lives forever. And now the very companies that hollowed out our friendships have the nerve to sell us their substitutes. AI, wearables like Friend, AI chat box companions like Replica. I don't know, I'm just reading this stuff. They have sold us simulations of human connection and community, friendships, customized exactly the way we want it. We have gamified everything, commodified everything, objectified everything, and you wonder why you're so lonely. And the antidote to that kind of ache, that loneliness, that emptiness, is for you to understand that there's only one place where you can be fully known and still be fully loved, and that is the love of God. The reason why we can love, the reason why we're able to love and to work and to serve is because we cannot give away what we do not possess. But if we have been blessed to possess this beautiful gift, then my friends, then treasure the object of your attention. It is priceless because God is priceless. He doesn't need to beg for our attention. He deserves our attention. He is so worthy to be praised and to be adored. Live a quiet life. Serve other people faithfully. Love one another without calculation.